for the previous 17 years. Then she combined them to one thing for me to live through. It's really ironic. For the first 5 to 7 years, I guess, we would see each other 4 times a day for exchanges. On average, every single day, I had to deal with some scene. A scene meaning she would just not show up, or she would hold the kid out and then pull him back and hold him out and pull him and just kind of play with me, or she'd let me have the kid and then she'd stand in front of the car so I couldn't move.
I'm stay in Mommy Town tomorrow. I'm gonna stay in Mommy Town for a couple of days, 2 days, and then you come back to Daddy.
Another time I saw her hold him by the shoulders and say, "Daddy is a bad man. Daddy is a very bad man." And so we had to go through this long custody battle, and the decisions that they would make, you would just go, wow. There couldn't be any explanation. Either they're absolute idiots or it's biased. There's just no other explanation for it. One other thing, his mom is obese and wanted him to be obese for various reasons. One thing is so he would identify more with her side of the family than mine, because we're all thin. Another was so that he would enjoy being with her more, because when he was at my house, he had to get activity, and eat well-balanced meals and get his sleep and stuff. And at her house, they would bake brownies and stay up late and just watch TV. And so where would you, if you're a little kid, where would you enjoy being more? But he self-reported to the mediator how upset he was about being obese. That the worst thing in school was when kids called him fatty, and how he cried. And his physician said that he's really concerned medically. And then when I did, he was at an age where he would imitate things that I would do. I gave him a broken shaver, so when I shaved, he would pretend to shave. And what I did was I started weighing myself every morning and writing down my weight, the date and the weight. And I taught him how to read a scale. So he kept his own records. So I had 6 months worth of statistics to show consistently that every time he was with his mom for a few days, he'd come back weighing 3 or 4 pounds more, and then he'd lose it while he was with me. So they had, that how much he was upset about the problem, they had his physician being upset about the problem, and they had the proof of where the problem lay. So the judge's decision was that father should no longer be allowed to weigh the child. Problem solved. After 14 years, my body gave out. I got sicker than I've ever been. I realized I'm going to die. That's not going to do anybody good. I've got to give up the fight. So I gave up custody. And so I don't see my son anymore. He hasn't been in my house since. So I did lose him.
Just like a dream. You're like a guiding light shining in the night.
Fred claims that during his 14-year custody battle, he spent the equivalent of 5 years of his gross income on legal fees, mediators, and child support payments.
I was really in his life a lot longer than most fathers would have been. It's something most fathers can't afford.
You are so beautiful. We generally know that fathers don't get as good a deal in family court, and we don't really complain about it until it happens to us. And even then, a lot of men don't.
Many men's rights activists come into being men's rights activists as a result of getting a divorce, wanting to be equally involved with the children, and realizing that women have the right to children and men have to fight for children.
When your family courts run on the supposition that mothers are more fit to be custodial parents and that fathers are more fit to provide a check every month and to become what we like to call Uncle Daddy, where they visit their children. To me, that's one of the greatest obscenities in the world, the idea of visiting your own children, where you get to see them for 2 hours on Wednesday night, and you get to have them for X amount of hours every other weekend, and you have no say in how they're brought up.
I can't tell you how many men have been in this office, in that chair, in tears because they can't see their kids.
some of this stuff ends up in horrific consequences. Like this gentleman here, that's his little son. They found him dead. Not the son, but the young man. In the desert with a bullet in his head. The day before the family court, where it became known that he was going to get to see his little guy even less. And of course, he'd been falsely accused one time after another. It had destroyed his life, it had bankrupted him, driven him into debt, it had caused him to miss work, he was about ready to lose his job, he was at the end of his rope, so he just decided to end it.
The unfairness in the family courts, the unfairness in the way child support is so often structured, it's commonplace and it's everywhere, and the more you start to become conscious of it, the more you realize that it's there.
I started to research some fathers' rights issues and came across some harrowing stories. Like this man in South Carolina who found out his only daughter was adopted away by the mother without his knowledge or consent.
His daughter was with an adoptive family in California, so he began his fight to get his daughter back.
Adoption is for children without families, not children with a willing and capable family.
And this man in Colorado who lost his daughter when the mother left the state to give birth in Utah where he wouldn't have legal rights to his child. He fought for 4 years in court and finally won visitation rights. Only visitation.
I can't explain the emotion, the happiness, this heart fight, and what this means to me.
And then there's this heartbreaking story.
The 20-year-old father never left her side until he was forced to give her to adoptive parents this week after Kaylee's mother decided to put her up for adoption. In order to keep Kaylee, Colby needed to file paternity action, an affidavit, and a commencement notice with Utah's vital records a day before the mother signed the adoption papers relinquishing her rights. But in Colby's case, the mother only gave him a few hours' notice of what she was going to do.
I would like her back. Men in the men's movement are not upset about having to be fathers. They're upset because they're not allowed to be fathers.
That guy blows his head out, blows his brains out. The family court? And people don't think there's something wrong with that? We just open the doors tomorrow for business as usual, and that's okay.
I've always thought of feminism as being the fight for gender equality. And yet, I've never heard about fathers' rights and the injustices going on in family court. Why is this? I decided to ask gender studies professor Michael Mesner.
Well, I'll just say I don't think it's... I don't think that a lot of their assumptions are correct to start with. There's no doubt that there have been some men who get just screwed by court decisions and custody cases, but I think when you look at the broader patterns, it's still the case that in intact heterosexual families with kids, women are still doing the vast majority of the housework and childcare, and there's a lot of sort of father absence, the lack of participation by fathers, some of whom I think then after divorce happens end up suddenly wanting equality, as fathers when they haven't really been participating equally as fathers before. So to me, it always kind of swings back to the feminist perspective of how we need to push for full equality across the board, including before divorces. And if we have that, then we might expect more symmetry after divorces happen.
The more I researched fathers' rights, the more I realized how deep this rabbit hole goes. Not only in the amount of issues, but also in the vast array of perspectives on these issues. I decided to create a flowchart of what I thought fathers' options might be following a surprise pregnancy. I then put a green line for the paths that I thought would be good turnouts for the father, and I put red lines for the paths that seemed to not be good for the father. Then I created a flowchart for women's options, and did the same with green and red lines. And as I stepped back, I saw all the red lines for the women's options,